The icy waves crashed against the rocky shore as the millionaire lunged forward. A pair of desperate amber eyes locked onto his spleeting, drowning. He pulled with all his strength. But just as he thought it was over, something unthinkable happened. The waves roared as the storm swept over the coastline, tearing through the once serene waters. The scent of salt and rain mixed in the air, thick and suffocating. Nathan Holloway stood at the edge of his vast cliffside estate, the wind tugging at his tailored coat. The world saw him as an untouchable figureone of the wealthiest entrepreneurs in the country, a man who had built an empire with ruthless precision. Yet in this moment he felt strangely hollow, as if he were nothing more than a shadow standing between the storm and the abyss. Nathan's estate, perched atop a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could drown out the noise of the world and lose himself in the illusion of control. But lately, control had slipped through his fingers like the fine sand beneath his Italian leather shoes. His life, structured and meticulously planned, had begun to feel meaningless. The vast corridors of his mansion echoed with emptiness, each passing day blurring into the next. He reached into his coat pocket, his fingers brushing against the cool metallic surface of a silver pocket watch. It was old, its edges worn, the glass slightly cracked. It had belonged to his father, a man who had built wealth with the same cold efficiency that Nathan had inherited. But unlike his father, Nathan had no one to pass it on to. No children, no family, not even a friend who would understand what it meant to carry the weight of an empire alone. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the churning sea below. That's when he saw its shape moving erratically in the water. At first, it was just a flicker, almost indistinguishable from the waves. Then, another flash of lightning revealed the desperate struggle. A dog, a large German shepherd, its legs kicking furiously against the current, its head barely above the water. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. It should have been easy to turn away. It wasn't his problem. The storm was too strong, the waves too powerful. Logic dictated that the animal would be lost before he could even reach it. But something inside him twisted. A sharp, unfamiliar pang of urgency gripped his chest. Without thinking, Nathan tore off his coat, letting it fall to the wet grass. The next thing he knew, he was sprinting down the jagged steps leading to the beach, his heart pounding against his ribs. The storm howled as he reached the shore, the freezing water rushing around his ankles. The dog let out a weak, gasping bark, its last plea for help. Nathan didn't hesitate. He dived in. The ocean was merciless. The cold struck Nathan like 1,000 needles piercing his skin, stealing the breath from his lungs. The waves crashed over him, dragging him under before he fought his way back up. The dog was ahead, its movement slowing. Nathan pushed forward, his arms burning with each stroke. Salt filled his mouth as he fought against the pull of the sea. He had spent his life conquering boardrooms, breaking competitors, building an empire from the ground up, but here, against nature's raw fury, he was just a man. A man desperate to reach a creature that had no reason to trust him, no reason to believe in salvation. With one final surge, he reached the dog. Its body was limp, its eyes barely open. Nathan wrapped his arm around the animal's torso, gripping it tightly as he turned toward the shore. But the ocean wasn't willing to let them go so easily. A monstrous wave rose behind them. Nathan barely had time to suck in a breath before it crashed down, plunging them into darkness. The world became a blur of white noise. The weight of the water pressed in from all sides, spinning him like a rag doll. His grip on the dog loosened. His lungs burned, screaming for air. For a moment, panic took hold, a sharp, primal fear. This was it. This was how it ended. No wealth, no legacy, just cold, black nothingness. Then something stirred within him, a defiance that had carried him through life's worst storms. He kicked hard, breaking the surface, gasping for breath. The dog was floating beside him, motionless. Nathan tightened his grip, forcing his legs to move, forcing his body to keep fighting. Inch by inch, he dragged them back toward shore. The sand met his feet, and with one final desperate push, he hauled himself and the dog onto the wet beach. His chest heaved as he rolled onto his back, rain hammering down against his skin. Beside him, the German shepherd lay still. Its fur, slick with seawater, barely rose and fell. Nathan turned onto his side, ignoring the pain screaming through his body. He pressed his hands against the dog's ribcage, pushing in steady, rhythmic compressions. "Come on, breathe." For long, agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then, a sudden, sharp cough. The dog's body jerked, and water spilled from its mouth. Its eyes fluttered open, dazed and unfocused, but alive. Relief crashed over Nathan so fiercely he almost laughed. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing over the animal's soaked fur. "You're all right," he murmured, his voice hoarse. The dog, as if understanding, let out a weak whimper before resting its head against Nathan's arm. The storm raged on around them, but in that moment, Nathan felt something shift, something inside him that had been broken for years. And then, just as his heart began to slow, he saw it. A shadow, moving at the edge of the beach, watching them. Something was out there. And whatever it wasn't alone. Nathan's breath was still unsteady, his body trembling from exhaustion, but his senses sharpened the moment he noticed the figure in the distance. The dark silhouette stood just beyond the reach of the storm's fury, unmoving, watching. For a moment, he thought it was a trick of the rain shadow cast by the swaying trees or the jagged cliffs behind the beach, but then it moved, slow, deliberate steps against the sand. Nathan's grip tightened around the German shepherd's damp fur. The dog, though weak, let out a low, guttural growl, ears pinned back. It saw it too. The storm raged on, thunder rolling across the sky, but the presence of that figure cut through everything else. Nathan forced himself upright, his muscles screaming in protest. "Who's there?" he called, his voice hoarse from the salt water and exhaustion. No answer. The figure didn't step forward, didn't retreat. It simply stood, a dark outline against the restless night. Nathan took a cautious step forward, the wet sand shifting beneath his feet. He was barefoot, drenched, and utterly exposed. The German shepherd let out another warning growl. Its body tensed despite its near drowning. Lightning streaked across the sky. For a fraction of a second, the beach was bathed in pale blue light and Nathan saw it. A man, dressed in a tattered coat, his hair clinging to his face, his eyes shadowed beneath the hood pulled low over his brow. He wasn't just watching, he was waiting. Nathan's instincts kicked in. Something was wrong. "Do you need help?" he asked, his voice firmer now. Still, the man didn't respond. He only tilted his head slightly, as if assessing Nathan. Then, before Nathan could take another step, the man turned and walked away. Not hurriedly, not in fear, just retreated, vanishing into the darkness beyond the reach of the waves. Nathan stood frozen, every nerve in his body on high alert. His mind raced. Who was he? Why was he standing there, waiting, watching? The dog let out a soft whimper, snapping Nathan's focus back to the present. Whoever that man was, he was gone now, and Nathan had more pressing matters to deal with. He turned back toward the shepherd, crouching beside it. The dog was still trembling, its ribs rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. "Come on, boy," Nathan murmured, sliding his arms beneath the animal's soaked body. "Let's get out of here." The dog didn't resist as Nathan lifted it, cradling its heavy frame against his chest. Each step back toward the winding cliffside path felt like moving through quicksand. His limbs ached, his lungs burned, but he kept going, pushing through the storm and the questions clawing at his mind. By the time he reached his estate, his body was on the verge of collapse. The mansion loomed in the darkness, its windows aglow with the faint golden light of the security lamps. He staggered through the gates, into the warmth of the grand foyer, dripping water onto the marble floor. His housekeeper, Maria, gasped when she saw him. "Senor Holloway, Dios mío, what happened?" Nathan ignored the question, his focus solely on the dog in his arms. Towels, blankets, now. Maria didn't hesitate. She rushed off, returning moments later with warm towels, her concerned gaze darting between Nathan and the soaked animal. He laid the shepherd down on the floor beside the grand fireplace, wrapping it in layers of warmth. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows across the high ceilings. Maria knelt beside the dog, her fingers gently brushing over its damp fur. "Where did you find him?" "The ocean," Nathan murmured, rubbing his hands over his arms, trying to chase away the cold. "He was drowning." Maria shook her head, murmuring something under her breath in Spanish before looking up at him. "And you just happened to be there?" Nathan hesitated. His mind flashed back to the shadowy figure on the beach. "No," he admitted. "I don't think it was coincidence." Maria's expression darkened. "What do you mean?" Nathan didn't answer, not because he didn't want to but because he wasn't sure how to explain the unease curling in his gut. Instead, he turned back to the shepherd. The dog had stopped shivering, its breathing steadier now. Its amber eyes met Nathan's, filled with something that sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't fear. It wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. Nathan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dim glow of the fireplace, watching the German shepherd rest, his mind circling the events of the evening. The dog was alive weak, but alive. But something about it gnawed at him. Recognition. It had looked at him as though it knew him, as though they had met before. That was impossible. Maria had left hours ago, muttering prayers under her breath, urging him to get some rest, but Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. At some point, the shepherd stirred. A soft whimper, a flick of the ears. Nathan leaned forward, brushing a hand lightly over its fur. "You're safe now," he murmured. The dog's eyes opened slowly, and then before Nathan could react it lifted its head and licked his hand. The simple action sent an unexpected warmth through him. A chuckle rumbled in his chest, soft and unfamiliar. "You're tougher than you look, huh?" The dog blinked, as if agreeing. For the first time in what felt like years, Nathan felt something other than exhaustion or numbness. He felt connected. He let his head rest against the couch, his body finally surrendering to the weight of the night. His thoughts drifted. He still didn't have answers. He still didn't know who the man on the beach was or why the shepherd felt so oddly familiar. But for now, exhaustion won. Sleep came in waves, pulling him under. Then, a sound. Soft, barely there. Nathan's eyes snapped open. The fireplace had dimmed, the embers glowing faintly. The house was silent. But outside, something moved. He sat up slowly, his pulse spiking. The German shepherd lifted its head too, ears twitching. It heard it as well. Footsteps. On the gravel outside. Nathan rose, moving toward the window. He pulled the curtain back just enough to peer out into the night. Nothing. Just the wind and the distant crash of the waves. But he knew he had heard it. Then just as he was about to step away, something changed. The air shifted, the security lights flickered, and there, standing at the edge of the estate's towering iron gates, was the man from the beach? Nathan's heart slammed against his ribs. The figure stood motionless, the storm now nothing more than a whisper around him. Waiting. Nathan's fingers curled into fists. Enough. He turned, grabbing the nearest coat, his movements quick, decisive. The shepherd growled low in its throat, sensing his intent. "Stay here," Nathan muttered, but as he stepped toward the door, the dog rose on shaky legs and followed. Nathan didn't stop it. The two of them and dog walked out into the cold night together, toward the shadow that refused to leave them alone. Nathan stepped into the night, his breath curling in the cold air. The German shepherd trotted beside him, still weak but determined. Together they moved toward the estate's iron gates, the man from the beach standing just beyond them, a dark figure against the moonlit landscape. The wind howled through the trees, but the man didn't move. His face remained shadowed beneath his hood, his posture eerily still. Nathan's pulse hammered, but his voice remained steady. "Who are you?" For a long moment there was no response. Then, "You should not have saved the dog." Nathan stiffened. The words were calm, almost regretful. His grip tightened around the gate. "Why?" The man let out a slow breath, tilting his head slightly. "Because now it begins." Nathan felt the first prickle of something deeper than fear, something primal, ancient. What begins? The man finally took a step forward into the glow of the security lights. Nathan could see him clearly now. Sharp features, hollow cheeks, eyes too dark to reflect the light. There was something unnatural about him, something that set every instinct on edge. "You don't recognize him, do you?" the man murmured, gesturing toward the German shepherd. Nathan glanced at the dog, its ears pinned back, its muscles tense. It wasn't just wary, it was afraid. A memory tugged at the edges of his mind, something buried deep, a scent of rain, a flash of pain, a voice screaming his name. Nathan forced the thought away. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I don't know you, and I don't know this dog." The man exhaled, almost in disappointment. "You will." Nathan took a step closer, anger cutting through the unease. "I don't have time for riddles. If you have something to say, say it." The man studied him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the road. Nathan watched him go, his hands still clenched into fists. He wanted to call him back, to demand answers, but some part of him knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Nathan barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, fragmented memories clawed their way to the surface. Rain, a sharp impact, blood on his hands, a name whispered in the dark. By morning, exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. He found himself staring at the German shepherd, still resting by the fireplace, its amber eyes watching him with quiet intensity. "You're not normal, are you?" Nathan muttered. The dog didn't respond, but something in its gaze felt almost human. A knock at the door broke the moment. Maria. Nathan opened it, rubbing his temple. "What is it?" She hesitated. "There is someone at the gate." His stomach twisted. "The man from last night?" Number. Maria's expression was unreadable. "It is someone asking for the dog." Nathan's blood ran cold. He strode past her, heart pounding, making his way to the front gate. A black SUV was parked just beyond it. A man in a crisp gray suit stood beside it, polished shoes gleaming against the damp gravel. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of quiet authority. Nathan didn't like him immediately. The man gave a polite nod. "Mr. Holloway." Nathan folded his arms. "Who are you?" "My name is Elias Carter. I work for an organization that specializes in rare cases." Nathan's jaw tightened. "And what exactly does this have to do with me?" Elias's gaze flicked past him, toward the house. "You saved something that wasn't meant to be saved." Nathan's breath stilled. Elias sighed, pulling a sleek black folder from his coat. "That dog," he said, "was never supposed to make it to shore." Nathan felt something inside him twist. "I don't know what kind of game this is, but I don't appreciate threats." Elias gave him a long, measured look. Then he flipped open the folder and handed it to him. Nathan stared. Photos, grainy, distorted images, of him, the night before, pulling the shepherd from the water. But there was something else, a second figure. Not the man on the beach, not Elias. Something in the water. Something that had been watching them from beneath the waves. Nathan's hands tightened around the folder. Elias's voice was calm. "You should have let him drown." Nathan looked up, every fiber of his being screaming against the words. The German shepherd had been watching the entire exchange from the porch. Now, for the first time, it bared its teeth. Nathan made his choice. He slammed the gate shut in Elias's face. "I don't know what you want," he said, "but you're not getting him." Elias sighed, pocketing the folder. "You will regret that." The SUV pulled away, leaving Nathan with more questions than answers. Behind him, the dog let out a quiet, knowing whimper. Nathan turned back toward the house, his mind racing. He had made his choice. But something told him the storm wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Nathan locked the door behind him, pressing his back against the cold wood. His pulse was a drumbeat in his ears, his breath uneven. The house, once a fortress of solitude, now felt like a cage. The German shepherd sat a few feet away, its golden eyes reflecting the dim light of the chandelier. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just watched, as if waiting. Nathan ran a hand through his damp hair, his mind a tangled mess of unanswered questions. The man on the beach, the suited stranger, the photos, the thing in the water. None of it made sense, and yet, deep in his bones, he knew this wasn't some elaborate joke. Something was very, very wrong. The wind howled outside, rattling the massive windows. Rain drummed against the glass like impatient fingers. Nathan felt the weight of exhaustion pressing against his skull, but there was no sleep waiting for him. Instead, there were memories. Memories that didn't belong to him. Flashes of cold water, of heavy chains, of a heartbeat slowing to nothing. He squeezed his eyes shut. What the hell is happening to me? A low whine pulled him back. He opened his eyes. The dog had moved closer, its head tilted slightly. Its fur, now dry, looked darker in the firelight, almost black. Nathan swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The words felt ridiculous, but somehow they weren't. The dog just stared. A memory surfaced sharp and sudden. A child, running through a golden field, laughter spilling into the wind. A dog at his side. A German shepherd. This German shepherd. Nathan staggered back, gripping the edge of the table for balance. His chest tightened. That wasn't his memory. He had never owned a dog. He had never run through fields or felt the warmth of the sun like that. And yet, he had. The house creaked as the storm raged on, but it wasn't the wind that made his skin crawl. It was the undeniable truth settling over him. This dog knew him, and somehow, he knew it. Nathan forced himself to breathe. He needed answers, not paranoia, not fear answers. With shaking hands, he grabbed his phone and did the one thing he never thought he'd do. He called his father. The line rang, once, twice. Then, "Nathan?" The voice on the other end was hoarse, as if pulled from sleep. Nathan clenched his jaw. "Dad, I need to ask you something." A pause, then, wary, "All right." Nathan swallowed past the lump in his throat. "Did we ever have a dog?" Silence. Not a hesitation, not confusion. Silence. A silence so deep, so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Then, in a voice Nathan had never heard from his father before, "You remember." The words sent a shock through Nathan's system. His grip tightened on the phone. "So it's true." Another long pause, then a slow, shaky exhale. "I prayed you never would." Nathan's breath hitched. The weight of his father's voice, the sorrow, the regret it made his stomach turn. "Dad, tell me, what am I remembering?" A rustling sound, a muffled sigh. Then his father spoke. "You had a dog once, when you were 7. Nathan's fingers went numb. His father continued, voice hollow. "His name was Max. He was your best friend." A pause. "But one night, we lost him." Nathan's head spun. "Lost him how?" The dog Max whimpered softly at his feet. His father hesitated. Then, in the quietest voice Nathan had ever heard from him, "You drowned with him." Nathan's vision blurred. Number. The room tilted. The walls felt like they were closing in. "That's not possible," Nathan rasped. "I'm alive. I'm standing here. What the hell are you talking about?" His father's voice cracked. "You don't understand. You did drown, Nathan. You both went into the river that night. The current took you under. You weren't breathing when they pulled you out." Nathan pressed a hand to his forehead. "Then how?" "The doctors called it a miracle," his father whispered. "They revived you. But Max didn't make it." Nathan's stomach twisted. A wave of nausea crashed over him. "Number, that doesn't make sense. If he died, then how is he here? How?" "I don't know." His father's voice was barely audible. "But listen to me, son. If Max is back, then something else came with him." Nathan's blood ran cold. A crash. The line went dead. Nathan whipped around, heart hammering, the front door. It had burst open. The storm raged outside, rain lashing into the foyer. Wind howled through the doorway, carrying the scent of the sea, but Nathan barely noticed. Because standing in the threshold, dripping wet, clothes clinging to his emaciated frame, was the man from the beach? His lips curled into a smile, eyes black as the void. "You should have let him drown." Then the lights flickered, and the world went dark. The darkness swallowed the house whole. Nathan's breath came in sharp, uneven bursts as he reached for the nearest objective fireplace, poker his fingers curling around the cold iron. His mind screamed at him to move, to run, to do something, but his body was frozen in place. The man from the beach stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his skeletal frame, his smile stretching too wide, too unnatural. "You should have let him drown," the man repeated, voice hollow, dead. Nathan clenched his jaw. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head, water pooling at his feet. "You already know." Lightning flashed, illuminating the scene for half a second. Nathan's stomach twisted. The figure wasn't just a man. His skin was wrong grayish-blue, like something that had been left in the water too long. His clothes, torn and hanging from his frame, were soaked, clinging to a body that seemed both too solid and not real at all. But the worst part, the part that made Nathan's blood turn to ice, was the chains. Thick, rusted, and covered in barnacles, they hung from the man's wrists, dragging across the marble floor as he took a step inside. Nathan stumbled back, his grip tightening on the poker. "Stay away from me." The man-thief thing didn't stop. "You were never supposed to come back, Nathan." His voice was almost pitying. Neither was he. Max let out a vicious snarl, stepping protectively in front of Nathan, his teeth bared. His once golden fur had darkened in the dim light, his body tense, poised to attack. Nathan's pulse pounded. "What do you want?" The thing's smile faltered. "Balance." Nathan swallowed hard. "Balance?" The chains rattled as the figure took another step. A life was taken that night. His black eyes flicked toward Max, and a life was spared. The realization hit Nathan like a thunderclap. Max had died that night, but Nathan had been brought back. Now, the scales were tipping. The thing sighed, almost regretfully. "You don't belong here, Nathan." Nathan's grip on the poker tightened. "I'm not going anywhere." The thing tilted its head, as if considering him. "Then neither is he." The temperature in the room plummeted. The fire in the hearth snuffed out, replaced by an icy gust that sent a shiver down Nathan's spine. The air itself felt wrong thick, heavy, as if the house was sinking into something unnatural. Then, the thing lunged. Nathan barely had time to react before the cold hands wrapped around his throat, shoving him backward. He hit the floor hard, the impact sending pain shooting through his back. Max launched forward, teeth snapping, but the thing barely flinched. It caught the dog mid-air, lifting him as if he weighed nothing. "No!" Nathan roared, forcing himself up. He swung the poker with everything he had, the metal colliding with the thing's shoulder. A sound, not a cry of pain, but something worse echoed through the house. Laughter. The thing laughed. Nathan's stomach twisted as the poker passed through the figure, as if striking water itself. The impact sent a freezing chill up his arm, his fingers instantly numbing. Max snarled, twisting in the thing's grip. But he wasn't afraid. He was angry. "You should have let him drown," the thing murmured again, its grip tightening. Nathan's vision blurred. Panic clawed at his throat. His mind raced. If brute force wouldn't work, then what would? Then, a memory surfaced. His father's words. If Max is back, then something else came with him. The thing hadn't attacked until Max was safe. It had been watching, waiting. It needed Max to be here. Because Max was the reason Nathan was alive. The realization hit him like ice water. The thing wasn't here to kill him. It was here to take Max back. "No," Nathan breathed, forcing himself to his feet. "No, I won't let you." The thing's grip tightened. Max let out a strangled yelp. Nathan's heart pounded. Think. The thing had said one word, one simple word. Balance. Nathan's hands clenched into fists. His entire life, he had believed in control, in logic, in wealth, and power. But this wasn't something he could buy his way out of. This was something else entirely. It wasn't about fighting. It was about choosing. Nathan's chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. "Take me." The thing stopped. Max went still. The room, the storm, the air itself seemed to pause. Nathan swallowed. His voice was hoarse, but steady. "You want balance?" He spread his arms. "Take me instead." The thing regarded him for a long, agonizing moment. Then, a slow, eerie smile. "Very well." The chains snapped forward, and everything went black. Cold. That was the first thing Nathan felt. Not just cold, something deeper. A sensation that seeped into his bones, into his lungs, into the very essence of what he was. He opened his eyes. He was standing in water. Dark, endless. A vast black ocean that stretched as far as the eye could see. The sky above was empty, no stars, no moon, just darkness. And in the distance, a ripple. Then, a voice. "You were never supposed to return." Nathan turned, his heartbeat hammering. The thing stood behind him, no longer a man, no longer even human. Its body shifted like the tide, fluid and endless. Its black eyes gleamed with something ancient. Nathan's breath came in ragged gasps. His mind screamed at him to wake up, to move, but he was frozen in place. The thing stepped closer. Balance must be restored. Nathan's jaw clenched. Then do it. The thing tilted its head. So eager? Nathan forced himself to breathe. "I made my choice." The thing regarded him for a long moment. Then, it raised a hand. The water beneath Nathan's feet shifted. And then, a bark. Nathan's head snapped up. Max. The dog stood at the edge of the abyss, his fur bristling, his golden eyes burning with something fierce. He wasn't afraid. He was defiant. Nathan's breath caught. The thing sighed. "He is not yours to keep." Max took a step forward, snarling. Nathan clenched his fists. Maybe not. Then, before he could second-guess himself, he ran. Straight through the water, straight toward Max. The thing lunged, but Nathan was faster. His legs burned, his lungs screamed, but he ran. The moment his fingers brushed Max's fur, the entire world shattered. The cold was gone. The darkness disappeared. And then, Nathan was gasping for breath, coughing, choking. He was on the floor of his estate. Max was beside him, his tongue licking Nathan's face frantically. Nathan's fingers curled into the dog's fur, his chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. The thing was gone. The chains were gone. The storm outside had passed. Max whined softly, pressing his head against Nathan's shoulder. Nathan let out a breathless laugh, wrapping his arms around the dog. "You're staying," he whispered. Max wagged his tail. This time, Nathan knew it was real. The morning light broke through the vast floor-to-ceiling windows of Nathan's estate, casting golden streaks across the polished marble floors. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from the storm that had passed. Everything was still, almost too still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Nathan sat on the living room floor, his back pressed against the couch, his body still weak from the night's events. Max was curled up beside him, his head resting on Nathan's lap, his amber eyes half closed but watchful. Nathan ran his fingers absently through the thick fur at the dog's neck, grounding himself in the warmth, the realness of it all. It was over. The thing, the shadow from the ocean, the figure wrapped in chainset was gone. And Max was still here. Nathan exhaled a long, shaky breath. He had spent years building walls around himself, fortifying his life with wealth, power, and an illusion of control. But last night had shattered everything. He had faced death, faced something beyond his comprehension. And he had chosen. Not himself. Not survival. But Max. His hand stilled on the dog's fur as the realization settled deep in his chest. This wasn't just about balance. It had never been about righting a cosmic mistake. It was about redemption. Nathan had spent his whole life believing that love-real, unconditional love was weakness, that attachments were dangerous, that caring too much meant losing everything. But Max had never hesitated. Not when he was a child. Not last night. Not even in death. Nathan closed his eyes. He didn't deserve this second chance. But Max had given it to him anyway. A quiet knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Maria. Nathan glanced at Max, who lifted his head but didn't growl. That was enough for him to know it was safe. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Maria stepped inside, her dark eyes scanning the room before settling on Nathan and Max. Her expression softened. "Dios mío," she murmured. "I thought you were dead." Nathan let out a breathless laugh. "So did I." Maria hesitated, then stepped closer. "I saw the door this morning," she said. "Blown open. Rain everywhere. And then you—" She shook her head, as if trying to find the right words. "Senor Holloway, what happened?" Nathan could have lied. Could have made up some simple excuse about a break-in, about a storm knocking the power out. But he didn't. He looked at Max, who stared back at him with quiet patience. Then slowly he met Maria's gaze. "I remembered something," he said quietly. Maria frowned. "What?" Nathan swallowed. "I remembered that I once had a best friend, and I lost him." Her expression flickered with something unreadable. Nathan continued, his voice hoarse. "And last night, he came back." Maria's gaze dropped to Max, who looked up at her, his tail thumping against the floor. She inhaled sharply, crossing herself. She believed him. She knew. Nathan hadn't realized how much he needed that until this very moment. Maria stepped closer, kneeling beside them. She reached out, hesitating for only a second before brushing her fingers over Max's head. "He's been waiting for you," she whispered. Nathan's throat tightened. "I know." A long silence stretched between them. Then Maria straightened, brushing her hands on her skirt. "You should eat," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Both of you." Nathan let out a tired chuckle. "Yeah." She hesitated at the door. "Senor Holloway?" He looked up. She smiled faintly. "You are not alone anymore." The words hit harder than he expected. Nathan nodded. "I know." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Nathan leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. The weight on his chest, the loneliness that had suffocated him for years felt lighter now. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. Max let out a deep, contented sigh, his tail flicking against Nathan's leg. Nathan smiled. Outside, the storm had passed. And for the first time in a long time, Nathan Holloway felt alive. Life has a way of bringing us back to what truly matters. Sometimes, it takes losing everything to realize what we've had all along. Nathan's story isn't just about second chances. It's about love, loyalty, and the choices that define us. Have you ever had a moment that made you rethink everything? A choice that changed your path forever? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes, the most incredible stories are the ones that remind us what it means to be human.